She used that voice, the one that had been creeping into our conversations for the past year or so, measured, careful, like she was explaining something to someone who needed extra time to understand. "Dad," my daughter said, "we just think it might be easier this year if you didn't come up to the cottage for Thanksgiving." I was standing in my kitchen in Waterloo, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October. The maple out front had just started turning, and my only daughter had just told me not to come to Thanksgiving dinner. "Easier," I said. "You know how things get. Last year, with Brenda's parents there, you made that comment about the hockey game and it got tense." I remembered the comment. I'd said the Leafs were playing soft, which is the kind of thing men in Ontario have been saying since before my daughter was born. Brenda's father had disagreed loudly. I'd disagreed back. That was apparently the incident. So the solution is I stay home. "Just this once, Dad. We'll do something separately with you. Maybe a dinner before you head to Florida." I wasn't going to Florida. I haven't wintered in Florida since my wife passed 4 years ago. My daughter knows this. But I didn't say any of that. I just said okay, finished the call, and stood at my kitchen window watching the maple until the light changed. I should explain something about myself. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a systems analyst with the region of Waterloo, retired in 2021, and I live alone in the house my wife Paulette and I bought in 1989, when this neighborhood was still half farmland. I am, by most accounts, not the easiest person to be around. I ask too many questions. I don't let things go. I have opinions about things. Transit infrastructure, municipal procurement, the way certain institutions handle data. And I share those opinions whether or not anyone has asked for them. My son-in-law, Brendan, Brenda's husband, my daughter's husband, found me, I think, exhausting. He was a project manager at a tech firm in Kitchener. Good income. Coached his son's soccer team. Had the right opinions about the right things. He was pleasant to me in the way that someone is pleasant to a piece of furniture they're hoping will eventually be moved to another room. My daughter, her name is Cara, loved me, I think, genuinely. But she loved her life more. And I had become a complication in it. I didn't go to Thanksgiving. I told myself it was fine. I made a roast chicken, watched a documentary about the St. Lawrence Seaway, called my old colleague Alan in the evening. He asked how the holiday was. I said quiet. He said same. We talked for an hour about nothing in particular, and when I hung up, the house felt very large. What I didn't tell Alan, what I didn't tell anyone, was that 2 months earlier, I had quietly begun working on something I'd been thinking about for a long time. When I was still with the region, one of my last projects before retirement was helping oversee a digital record system for municipal infrastructure maintenance. I won't get too technical, but the core problem was this. Municipalities across Canada were spending enormous amounts of money on emergency repairs for aging water, road, and electrical infrastructure because the inspection and maintenance data was siloed, inconsistent, and nearly impossible to analyze in any predictive way. Every city was sitting on decades of records that could theoretically tell you when a pipe was likely to fail, but nobody had built a reliable framework to read across those systems and generate actionable timelines. I had thought about this problem for years. After Paulette died and I retired, I started thinking about it differently. Not as someone else's problem to solve, as mine. I had the principles. I'd spent 3 decades living inside that data. I understood how municipalities collected it, stored it, misused it, lost it. I'd written a paper on it in 2019 that got politely ignored by everyone except one professor at the University of Waterloo who sent me a short email saying it raised good points. I thought about that email sometimes. So in August, about 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, I set up a workspace in Paulette's old sewing room, and I started building. I was not a software developer in any conventional sense. I could work in Python. I understood data modeling. I'd spent enough years supervising technical teams to know what good architecture looked like. I hired a young freelancer named Theo, a recent Waterloo grad, who needed the project hours to help me build out what I couldn't build myself. I told him what I needed. He built it. We worked by email mostly, sometimes a video call on Thursday evenings. I did not tell Cora. I did not tell Brendan. I did not tell Alan. I told no one, partly because I didn't want to explain something that might amount to nothing, and partly because I had grown used to the particular silence of no one asking. By the time Thanksgiving came and went without me, I had a working prototype. It wasn't polished, but it did what I believed it could do. It could ingest infrastructure maintenance records from multiple municipal formats, normalize them, and output a risk-ranked maintenance timeline with a confidence model. I tested it against public data from 3 mid-sized Ontario cities, and the projections aligned almost exactly with failures that had already been publicly reported. I sat with that for a few days. Then I sent an email to a woman named Sylvia Kwan. Sylvia Kwan was a partner of the Toronto firm that did municipal technology consulting. I had met her once, years ago, at a conference in Hamilton, where I'd given a presentation that received moderate applause and one good question, which Sylvia had asked. I had not spoken to her since, but I remembered the question. It was the kind of question someone asks when they've understood something. I sent her a 2-paragraph email describing what I'd built. I attached a 12-page technical summary. I said if she had 30 minutes, I'd appreciate a call. She replied in 4 hours. She said she had a lot of questions. We spoke that Thursday. I explained the framework. She asked about the confidence model, about data acquisition agreements, about liability around predictive maintenance failures. I answered the ones I could and told her plainly which ones I hadn't fully thought through. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I have thought about almost every day since. Do you understand what you have here? I said I thought I had an idea. She said, no, I don't think you do yet. Give me 2 weeks. I gave her 2 weeks. I went back to my kitchen and my cold coffee and my maple tree, which had by then lost most of its leaves. I watched curling on television. I had dinner with Alan one Friday at a Greek place on King Street. Life was ordinary and quiet, and I tried not to think too much about what Sylvia Kwan might be doing with 2 weeks. She called back in 11 days. There was a consortium. She was careful about the details until agreements were in place. A consortium of municipal governments across Ontario and British Columbia that had been collectively looking for exactly this kind of solution for almost 3 years. They had budget, they had a procurement process already partially underway. What they didn't have was a framework that actually worked. They want to license your methodology, Sylvia said, and they want to discuss a service contract for implementation and ongoing development. I asked what kind of numbers we were talking about. She told me. I wrote the number down on a piece of paper and looked at it for a while. I thanked Sylvia and told her to proceed. I sat in Paulette's sewing room for a long time after that, looking at the work table where I'd spent the last 4 months. There was a mug with 3 pens in it that had been Paulette's. A small photo of us from a camping trip in Algonquin Park, 1997. I hadn't planned any of this with her in mind exactly, but she had been a practical woman who believed in doing the work in front of you and not worrying about who was watching. I thought she would have found the whole thing quietly satisfying. The news broke on a Thursday evening in late February. Sylvia had warned me it would. There was a joint press release from 3 municipal governments, a brief mention of the licensing agreement, and then a technology journalist at CBC picked it up and wrote a piece that was more substantive than I'd expected, naming me by name and describing the framework with more accuracy than most journalists manage. The piece ran online in the late afternoon, and by that evening it had been picked up by 2 other outlets. I knew about the piece. I had given Sylvia permission to share my name when the time came. I didn't think much of it would land anywhere interesting. I made dinner, salmon, roasted sweet potato, a habit for when Cora used to come for Sunday meals, and I was watching a program about the Northwest Passage when my phone lit up. It was 12:47 in the morning. Brendan's name on the screen. My son-in-law. I almost didn't answer. We had not spoken since Christmas, which I had attended a tense, obligatory 4 hours at their house in Cambridge, and the conversation had been minimal. But something about 12:47 a.m. made me pick up. Hello. Is this... He stopped, restarted. I'm looking at the CBC website right now. All right. It says here Another pause. I could hear him breathing. You license some kind of infrastructure system to a group of municipalities. That's essentially correct. 4. He lowered his voice, like Cora was asleep nearby and he didn't want to wake her. For how much? I thought about whether I wanted to answer that. I thought about the Thanksgiving table I hadn't sat at. I thought about being told, in careful language, that my presence made things easier to manage when I was absent. Enough, I said. There was a long silence on the line. Cora didn't know about this, he said. No. You were doing this, and you didn't. Brendan, I said. It's nearly 1 in the morning. Is there something specific you need? He didn't answer that. He said he was going to wake Cora. I told him to let her sleep. He ignored me, and I heard murmuring in the background, her voice rising slightly. And then she was on the phone. Dad. Hi, sweetheart. Dad, what is this? What did you do? The way she said it, what did you do, there was something in it that wasn't accusation. It was closer to wonder. Like she was trying to make a map of something she hadn't known existed. I built a framework for predictive infrastructure maintenance, I said. A municipality consortium licensed it. It came together over the past several months. You've been working on this since? August. Silence. August, she repeated. All fall. While you were just. She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't finish it for her. I didn't mention it, I said, because I didn't want to talk about it until there was something to talk about. That's just how I've always worked. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. We didn't even know you were. Dad, we thought you were just. Watching curling, I said. I know. Another long silence. Then she said, Can I come see you this week? I said, Of course. She came on Saturday, without Brendan. She brought a lemon loaf from a bakery on Water Street that she knows I like. We sat at the kitchen table where we hadn't sat together in a long time, and she had coffee and I had tea, and neither of us spoke for the first minute or so, which is something we've always been able to do together, the two of us. Sit quietly without it meaning anything terrible. She said eventually, I didn't handle the Thanksgiving thing well. No, I said. Brendan thought it would be. It doesn't matter what he thought. I should have told him no. I didn't say anything. You should have been there, she said. I looked at my tea. The maple out front was bare now in the February cold, just gray branches against a gray sky. But there were buds starting. Just the earliest suggestion of them. You had to know what to look for. Are you angry? She asked. I thought about that honestly. I was, I said. I'm less so now. Because of the money. No, I said, and I meant it. The money was real, and it was significant, and I won't pretend it hadn't changed my sense of what the next years would look like. But the shift I'd felt since August had nothing to do with the consortium or the press release, or Brendan's panicked phone call at 12:47 a.m. It had to do with sitting in that sewing room, night after night, working on a problem no one else was paying attention to, and finding out that I still could, that I hadn't gone quiet inside just because the world around me had gotten quieter. Because of the work, I said. Cora looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, the way she used to nod as a child, when something made sense to her that she hadn't expected to make sense. Grandma would have loved this, she said. I think so. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, briefly. Then she picked up her coffee and looked out the window, and we sat there like that in the February light, while the tea went warm and the sky stayed gray, and the maple stood out there, quietly getting ready. I didn't say everything I could have said that day. I didn't tell her how many Saturday nights I'd eaten alone and told myself it was fine. I didn't tell her about the Thanksgiving chicken I'd eaten, standing at the counter because setting the table for one felt like admitting something. I didn't tell her how it felt to have my son-in-law talk to me the way you talk to a meeting that's running long. Some things you hold, not out of bitterness, out of self-preservation, out of the understanding that some distances, once closed, take more than a lemon loaf and a Saturday afternoon to fully cross. What I did say, before she left, was that I wanted us to do better. She said she did too. I believed her. I even believed Brendan would eventually find his footing with me, though probably not for reasons I found entirely flattering. There were more calls in the weeks that followed. From Cora, more regularly. From Brendan, once, formally, asking if I wanted to come to his son's hockey tournament in Guelph. I went. It was cold and loud, and I sat in the stands with a bad coffee and watched my grandson skate hard, and I clapped When the other parents clapped, and when the boys scored a goal in the second period, he looked up into the stands and found my face first, which I noticed and which I will probably remember for a long time. Sylvia Kwan called in March to walk me through the implementation timeline. She asked at the end of the call if I'd considered what came next, whether there was a second version of the framework, a broader application, a consulting role I might want to play in the rollout. I told her I'd been thinking about it. She laughed and said she was glad. That evening, I walked down to Victoria Park, which was just starting to come back to life after the winter. A few joggers, some geese on the ice at the edge of the pond, a couple of kids on bicycles ignoring the cold the way Canadian kids do. I sat on a bench for a while. I thought about what I'd been doing all those months. Not the framework, not the licensing deal, but the actual thing underneath all of that. The act of taking a problem seriously when no one else thought it mattered, and staying with it until it became something real. I thought about Paulette, and the sewing room, and the mug with 3 pens. I thought about Cora's hand on mine across the kitchen table. I thought about my grandson finding my face in the stands. I sat there until my hands got cold. Then I got up and walked home, and I thought maybe next week I'd have Cora and the kids over for dinner. Maybe a roast. Something that took most of the afternoon to make. I'd leave the good chair open. The one by the window. There's a version of this story where I become bitter. I've thought about that version. It wouldn't have taken much. Just a few more years of quiet dinners alone, a few more phone calls where my daughter's voice had that careful, managed quality to it, and I think I could have settled into something hard and closed. A lot of men my age do. You can't really blame them. But I think about what actually happened, and I keep coming back to something simple. The work was always there. The problem I'd been turning over in my mind for a decade didn't care whether my son-in-law found me interesting. The data didn't need me to be invited to Thanksgiving to be real, and when I finally sat down in that sewing room and started building, not for anyone, not to prove anything, just because it was the right problem and I was the person who understood it, something shifted in me that had nothing to do with money or recognition. That's the part I want to be honest about. Because I think it gets lost when people hear a story like this. They hear the licensing deal and the CBC piece and Brendan's 12:47 a.m. phone call, and they think the point is that things worked out. But the point, at least for me, is what happened in the months before any of that. The months when nobody knew. When I was just a retired man alone in a house in Waterloo, working at a table in a room that still smelled faintly of fabric and old thread, and choosing, every day, to keep going. I've come to believe that how you conduct yourself when no one is watching is the whole thing. Not half of it, the whole thing. Cora came back. Brendan called. My grandson found my face in the stands. Those moments are real, and I'm grateful for them. But they didn't make me who I am. I was already that person, sitting alone on Thanksgiving with a roast chicken, writing code into a problem the world hadn't asked me to solve. There's something about that kind of persistence, the unsexy, unglamorous kind, where you just keep showing up to the work because you believe it matters, that eventually becomes its own answer. Not always in a licensing deal. Sometimes just in the knowledge that you didn't go quiet when things got hard. That you kept your mind sharp and your hands busy and your integrity intact, even when the easier path was to fold into resentment. Cora asked me once that Saturday at the kitchen table whether I was angry. I told her I had been, and I meant it. I was. There were nights in October and November where the unfairness of it sat heavy in my chest, and I had to just breathe through it and go back to work. But anger, held long enough without somewhere to go, turns into either bitterness or fuel. I chose fuel. I don't say that like it was easy or noble. I say it because it was the only option I could live with. My grandson scored that goal and looked up and found me first. I don't think he knew why that mattered. He's 8. But I'll carry that for the rest of my life. And I think the reason it happened, the reason I was in those stands at all, is because I never stopped being someone worth finding. That's the only lesson I know how to offer. Stay with the work. Keep your word to yourself. The rest has a way of finding you.